Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Well, haven't you caused a kerfuffle? Because, yep, that promise that was made during the Trump election campaign that he was going to protect the American steel and aluminium industries, well, it really has come to pass. Not just tariffs on China that we saw happening a couple of months ago, but now, as of midnight tonight, June 1st, tariffs of 25% on steel, 10% on aluminium, as we say on this side of the pond, and that will apply to the European Union, which of course still means us, because we're still part of it and we don't have our own independent trade policy. But it also will include Mexico and Canada too. But before I get on to that, a little bit of breaking news in Italy. The leaders of the Five Star Movement, Luigi Di Maio, and the leader of the League, Matteo Salvini, have said in a statement within the last hour that they have achieved the conditions for a political government. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means they have withdrawn their proposed finance minister, Savona, the man that had said in the past that Italy needed to leave the euro, and they put somebody in who hasn't got quite that track record. Now, be under no illusions, they're not going to pick an IMF official or somebody from the European Commission, but they'll present a government that they think now President Sergio Mattarella can accept. And my guess is that Mattarella will accept this. Why? Because he realises that his choice, picking a sort of life civil servant from the IMF, it just made no sense at all. And he knew the Italian parliament would reject it, and there'd be a government without any authority in Italy at all, and more elections would have been inevitable, with even bigger wins, one suspects, for those voices of opposition. So I think it now suits the President of Italy to accept this new formation of government, with them having made a bit of a compromise. Also, Saturday is Italy's National Day. There are going to be millions of people out in piazzas and parks and having a big celebratory day with the Italian flag. Again, it all makes sense, doesn't it, to get this government in place. So I think it's a reality. I would be extremely surprised if this government wasn't formally in place by the close of play business tomorrow. And then the real fun will, of course, begin because they will start to make changes with illegal immigrants and with government spending that some people won't like. I'll tell you one person who won't like it, and that's Jean-Claude Juncker. Now, there have been fierce negotiations, and the EU have been trying to stop Trump from putting these tariffs in place. Trump's argument from the start is that the EU puts tariffs on a whole load of American products coming into the European Union, and that there's a big trade imbalance between particularly Germany and the United States of America. But Juncker responded this afternoon like this.
This is a bad day for the world trade. The European Union cannot react to that without any kind of reaction. So we'll immediately introduce a settlement dispute on the WTO level, and we'll announce in the next coming hours counterbalancing measures. What they can do, we are able to do exactly the same. It's totally unacceptable that a country is imposing unilateral measures when it comes to world trade.
Terrible, isn't it? I mean, it's awful, Jean-Claude Juncker. How on earth could America do this? Oh, that's right, because last year you put tariffs on aluminium and steel at almost exactly the same percentages coming in from China. Talk about hypocrisy. It's okay when the EU does it. It's a catastrophe, he thinks, when Trump does it. What is the impact of all of this going to be? Is this as big a story as it appears to be on the news wires at this moment in time? Well, US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross had this response on CNBC earlier when he was asked whether Trump had launched a trade war, because that has been kind of the talk of the street today. This is very serious. It can have a really hugely negative effect on the global economy. Hear what Ross had to say on that.
No, not at all. As you know, this has been under discussion for quite a long time, and it's a very small percentage of the respective economy, a fraction of 1%. There are overall discussions long underway regarding NAFTA, so this would presumably be part of that continuing discussion. And similarly, we've had periodic discussions with the EU.
And Ross was also asked his thoughts about the EU's proposed $3 billion tariffs on US goods as the countermeasure that you heard Juncker discussing earlier.
Think about how small in number $3 billion of product is relative to our $18 trillion economy. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of 1%.
It's just very small beer, is what Wilbur Ross is saying. So in some ways, what Trump has done today is actually more about symbolism than it is actually about trade. I think we get overexcited about tariffs. There are many, many other factors that affect trade, currency movements, your own relative competitiveness in the labour market, in your own country, many, many factors that affect trade. Now, look, I'm generally not somebody that is a great believer in tariffs, but is it not reasonable for a national leader to put in place protection for his or her industry? Is there anything wrong, folks, with this degree of protectionism? And if you think, yep, it's negative, narrow, it's insular, it'll be bad for global business and Trump should not have done it, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, actually, do you know what? I wish our leaders protected British industries rather more than they can, because at the moment we're not allowed to, but we may be after Brexit, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think, actually, do you know what? Truth of it is, Trump said in the election campaign he would do this. This is the democratic process playing itself out for good or bad, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC and watch us on Facebook. I'm live here from the London studio. Is it wrong for national leaders to protect industries that they see as vital or perhaps even as strategic? Alan is calling from Ballycastle in Northern Ireland. Good evening, Alan.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So, is what Trump has done very bad news?
Tariffs and trade are undesirable, but sometimes they're quite necessary. Sometimes I think it's necessary for national governments to protect home industries if that home industry faces unfair competition.
Yes.
I would say that there might be some of the European steel aluminium producers, for example, that might not be just playing fairly. I think that there could be, because you know how good the EU and EU countries are, especially the French, at creative accountancy. I think it's possible that they could be subsidising their industries and providing unfair competition. On top of that, of course, you have to remember that steel and aluminium, for a country, they're strategic industries. You know, it's vital, I think, that a country, especially the US, the United Kingdom and such like, should have steel production and aluminium production and production indeed of other metals available to that country for defence purposes.
Yes. Yeah. No. Alan, there is a strong strategic argument for steel. Now, our steel industry has declined hugely. And just to put this in perspective, Alan, our total sales of steel last year to the USA were about 360 million sterling. Now, if you're listening to this and you work for a steel company, you won't be happy with what's happened today. But overall, Alan, this is not going to impact on us very severely. And maybe, and I'll put this point to you, Alan, maybe on the grounds of defence and strategy, it might have been better if we a few years ago had stopped unfair competition from China closing down many of our steel mills.
Oh, absolutely. The Chinese, obviously, they can produce stuff a lot cheaper. They don't play fair at all. The same way, of course, as the South Koreans don't play fair with shipbuilding. South Korea actually subsidises its shipbuilding industry, and South Korean shipbuilders can produce ships for less than the cost of making them.
I know, and that's
shipbuilders have
it's outrageous.
Of competing against them.
So Alan, just to conclude, Trump is well within his rights, in your view, to do what he's done.
I don't think he's doing the right thing, but I think it's a case of he's doing the wrong thing, but for the right reasons.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. On Twitter, I really believe that if we weren't part of the EU, we wouldn't be facing the same levies from Trump. So do I. Whoever sent that on Twitter, so do I. Here we are, trapped. It was Rob, in fact, on Twitter. We are trapped as part of the EU's trade policy. I am certain that an independent United Kingdom would not be in the position that our steel and aluminium firms that sell stuff to America are right now. Nigel, so the unelected Juncker can put up the cost of our goods to the USA without any reference to the Brits. This is why 17.5 Brits are taking back control, says Paul from Isha. Well, we're trying to, aren't we? Nigel, Juncker says it's protectionism, which it is, but how ironic, coming from a man who heads the most protectionist organisation in the world. Hypocrisy beyond belief. Stones in glass houses spring to mind. I get on SMS. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive at LBC. It's now 7:15. Trump keeps his tariffs, and that's going to affect the UK too, as well as, of course, the rest of the Union, which we're still part of, Mexico and Canada. Some people are saying this is a really bad move. It could lead to a big trade war. Jean-Claude Juncker has promised retaliation. But, as US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has said, actually, the American economy is $18 trillion, $3 billion worth of tariffs from the EU. He's not too worried about. I don't think we should get too overly excited about tariffs. Meanwhile, Mike Pompeo, US Secretary of State, is now holding a press conference speaking right now on North Korea. He's talking in vaguely positive terms about the relationship with North Korea, but not saying anything in particular, other than they would like to get the Singapore summit for June the 12th back on track, and a letter will be going from Kim Jong-un to Donald Trump, which he will get later today. Whether the Pompeo press conference is just playing for time, or whether there is dramatic news in that letter, which he's saving for the president to announce, is, I think at this stage, anybody's guess. And as I mentioned earlier, the Italians are on the very edge now of forming a government, and they're going to present a real problem to Brussels. They cannot, given what they've promised their electorates, back down on their spending pledges, back down on their desire to start removing illegal immigrants, in a very, very big way, perhaps up to 500,000 people. So there is going to be great confrontation coming ahead. All of which makes me wonder how that well-known actor Colin Firth is feeling about life, because he described Brexit as a disaster of unexpected proportions. And as a result of that, he applied and was accepted for Italian citizenship. Well, I hope he kept his British passport, because, Colin, the Italians might leave this wretched union before we do. Hey, let's wait and see. Back to tariffs, back to Trump, and back to, does a national leader have the right to do this? Graham says to me on SMS, Juncker has quite a nerve complaining about protectionism. Well, yes, because the EU is very protectionist in many, many ways. Steve is calling from Islington. Good evening.
Nigel, do you have your German passport yet?
No, I've never applied for one. Carry on, Steve. What's your question?
Right, with the imposition of tariffs to be protectionist in order to benefit America, one of the reasons of Brexit, we are told that if we leave the EU, we will be able to remove tariffs.
Yes.
So that will obviously not be of benefit to us if the imposition of tariffs is a benefit to America. And what you've got to bear in mind is that a few years this has been pointed out about the steel in this country, where David Cameron could have imposed tariffs just like the EU to protect our steel economy. He chose not to. and subsequently the economy went down the pan.
Yeah, no, Steve, I've been critical already about the previous government on this, and I agree with you on that, although... you could argue the EU themselves were very slow to act on what was effectively Chinese dumping. But Steve, do you not think that if the UK had its own trade policy, and given that Wilbur Ross, and I've talked to him face to face about it, given that Wilbur Ross and President Trump want a big, all-encompassing trade deal with the United Kingdom, do you not think on our own we could have excused ourselves from these tariffs?
Well, what worries me is that dealing with one of our biggest trading partners, the US, and the US dealing with one of its biggest trading partners, the EU, has chosen to tear up all its agreements to the detriment of those agreements and to the workers within the EU. And my worry is that we won't necessarily get a good deal with the US, because if the US don't like it, they won't honour it, as we've seen in recent weeks that they're prepared to...
Well, Steve, OK, I know, I understand exactly the logic of what you're saying, but there was an election campaign. It was Trump v. Clinton, and and Trump made it really, really clear, during that election, that if he was elected, there would be fundamental changes to NAFTA. He made it pretty clear that he wasn't happy with the way the EU dealt with American goods. He also promised that America would withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. And he's doing all of those things. Now, Steve, whether you think they're the right things or the wrong things, isn't that what democracy is actually all about?
Yeah, there's democracy and contractual obligation. And those countries have entered into a contractual obligation, and that we should wait for for those terms to come to their natural fruition before they're just renegotiated. I mean, you can't just go around tearing up contracts just willy-nilly. I mean,
Steve, I don't agree with you. These are not being torn up willy-nilly. They were discussed with the American electorate, and they made a decision. And I think that's a very important distinction. He's not just tearing stuff up. He's not just making this stuff up on the hoof. He told the whole country what he would do.
So where does that leave us? If we have a contract, if we enter into negotiations with America, as one of the few people that are prepared to deal with us after Brexit, and then during the next election...
Oh no, Steve, the whole world wants to deal with us. The whole world is knocking our door down.
The majority of the third world wants to deal with us, and we will have to compete on their terms.
No, and Steve, the developed world does too. The trouble is, I begin to wonder, it's a slightly separate debate, Steve, but I begin to wonder whether the rest of the world's now taking us very seriously. Because if transition's going to go on until 2023, or goodness knows when it is, this is all, I'm afraid, a long way in the future. Anyway, Steve, you think Trump has done the wrong thing, and you believe he should have stuck with the previous agreements, yeah?
I think he should have honoured the previous agreements and entered into negotiations, yes. OK, fair dues. Steve, thank you. Well, there were negotiations, and in fact, Wilbur Ross was speaking from Paris, so it's not as if this hasn't been talked about. If Trump causes a bunch of globalist spivs apoplexy, his policy is correct, says Richard. I like that very, very much. Good for Trump. Looking after number one. Shame our leaders don't do the same, says Ron. And I think, Ron, actually, there is quite a feeling out there amongst many people that maybe you should start to put the interests of some of your own industries first. Robert on Facebook says, protect your own first. Cher says, lol, what can the EU do to America? Nothing in comparison. Yeah, when Juncker was speaking, I was sort of muttering, I will do such things, the Shakespearean line from Lear, and I don't think they can do very much. David is a new caller from Tunbridge Wells. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Lovely to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So, was Trump within his rights to do this? Because the previous caller thought that because previous American administrations had signed into things, that he should honour that.
No, I think he's played an absolute blind on himself. He's doing right by the American steelworkers, and I only wish we had leaders over here who would do exactly the same thing. Nigel, last year, the steel workers in Redcar, the 2,200 who lost their job.
Yeah.
They would be, I would have thought, listening to this, thinking, if only we had the same people backing us.
David, I think that's right. And I do think I do think there's a feeling in this country, certainly in Italy, right at the moment, with this new government being formed, there is a feeling that we've given away decision-making powers on issues like this from our directly elected leaders who make promises to us at elections to a higher level of global order, which tends to be rather dominated by big multinationals and big banks. There's a feeling, David, of helplessness. There's a feeling that the democratic process just not responding to our concerns. So, yeah, I suspect, David, there are steel workers and people in the fishing industry and many other industries listening to us right now, David, that would agree with you 100%. Do you think, once Brexit's happened, that Theresa May will start standing up for British businesses?
No, I don't trust her as far as I can throw, Nigel. I said that as soon as she became the leader of the Tory party. I don't trust any of them, to be fair. The sooner we're out, the better. You know, it's to say that everyone keeps thinking that we're going to suffer. If we suffer, then the European businesses suffer. The Germans suffer. The Spanish, they all suffer. Now, at the moment, none of them can afford to do it. You know, especially the Italians, the way things are going on over there at the moment.
They've had a rotten time.
They've seen the writing on the wall, the Italians, Nigel. That's why they've got the people who's going to come into power very shortly. And I think this is the beginning of the end for the EU, hopefully.
Well, I think it may well be too, David, although I suspect it won't tumble quickly. Thank you. Special relationship, ? Yeah, right, ? Wake up, ! The US has only ever and always will put itself number one. The rest of the world can go fly a kite, says Russell. I don't really think that's right, Russell, do you? Do you know, for much of the post-war period, they had 500,000 men on European soil, defending European liberty, democracy and freedom. And there may be elements of America that you don't like. But this idea that they are a completely selfish, isolationist country is total and utter tosh. Mark on Facebook says, why should the USA do anything for us the way we have been treating him? Oh gosh, Mark, you wounded me a bit here because you're right. Every holier-than-thou lefty is just itching to show him how virtuous they are when he comes here. Why should he care? Well, I bet Mr. Burko might go and join the Mayor of London. You never know. Mark, you're right. I had thought that post-Brexit, Cameron going, Trump as a new president, I had genuinely thought there was a great opportunity for the Atlantic to get a whole lot narrower. And I have to say, 2 years on, none of that's happened. In fact, in some ways, our relations are quite frosty. Where he appears to have built quite good relations with Macron, whatever their policy disagreements may be. But, Mark, the answer to your question is, why would he do anything for us after the way we've been treating him? Because we have an American president who is half British and feels a strong link and bond with this country and knows that when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to military action, this is the one European country that they absolutely believe in and trust. And that is why. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive at LBC. It is now 7:30. Trump's trade tariffs are on steel and aluminium, and, you know, NAFTA are not going to be happy because they affect Canada, they affect Mexico, and, of course, they affect the European Union, which still means that it affects us. And I've made the point that if you're working for a steel company, it's not a good day. Overall, for the size of our economy, it does not pose a massive threat. But I do feel we could and should have done a lot more for the British steel industry. Cameron, frankly, was pretty much asleep at the wheel on this one. And I believe if we were not part of the European Union, we would have negotiated an exemption. Before I get back to that, photograph that stares out of this morning's newspapers at me is Justine Greening, Amber Rudd and Damian Green leaving Downing Street after their meeting with Theresa May yesterday morning. And these former cabinet ministers are pressing Theresa May for a sensible Brexit, by which I think they mean not really a Brexit at all, or at least, at best, Brexit in name only. And, you know, remember, at the end of next month, which is tomorrow, there is going to be a very major European summit at which Theresa May is going to face, the might of Michel Barnier, backed up by his henchmen like Verhofstadt. And, you might say to me, well, surely, Nigel, they're more worried about Italy, but maybe because they've got problems with Italy makes them even less likely to want to concede much to us. All of which makes me think of a Channel 4 film that was on last night, Carry On Brussels, a fly-on-the-wall documentary featuring Labour and Conservative and UKIP MEPs, and the one sole Liberal Democrat MEP was part of it yesterday. Her name's Catherine Bearder. She represents the southeast of England, and she took Professor Grayling, the intellectual who often appears on LBC, and she took him to meet Verhofstadt. And there we saw Professor A.C. Grayling saying to Verhofstadt, please make sure that the deal Britain gets is as bad as possible. What? Yes, that's right. As bad as possible. Because he then hopes that it'll all be so difficult that we'll have to have a second referendum or simply not leave the European Union. And it is, I think in the olden days, we would have called it a form of treachery. But all these people who keep making this beeline to meet Barnier and Verhofstadt, all they are doing is undermining the negotiating position of what is, to be frank, already a pretty weak government. Another story that I can't resist. Markus Ferber. He's an MEP. He's from the CSU, which is the German Conservative Party in Bavaria. And speaking on German television last night, he said that the Troika, and this is the international group of the IMF, the European Central Bank, and he's saying that the Troika should march into Rome if a Eurosceptic government is formed. I mean, can you believe it? A day after, you remember the commissioner, Mr. Oettinger, had said that the financial markets would teach the Italians how they should vote in the future, and that caused uproar. Once again, we have a German political figure saying to the Italians, we are going to march into Rome. You simply can't believe it. How they think any of this is helping, I simply don't know. And it leads to a narrative of some that say that if you're now part of the Eurozone, you are now effectively run by Germany. And people just don't like that. Back to tariff. The UK only exports £360 million of the steel to the US, so it's not going to impact on our country very much. I'm sure the thousands of British steel workers will be delighted to hear you say that, Nigel. Look, I've made it clear, haven't I? If you work for those firms, you will not be very pleased. But do not... The fact that these tariffs are dominating the headlines on LBC and all other news media at this moment in time, all I'm saying to you is, do not read into it this is some huge national catastrophe overall. It is not. Nigel, didn't you think that Juncker looked totally rattled today? Well, it was after lunch. Brexit, Spanish elections. Yeah, Rajoy is losing as we speak tonight. A motion of confidence in Madrid. Italian politics being anti-EU, trade war with the USA, the German-dominated euro is going to fail this year. Not a good day to be a Juncker. Nigel, I'm Solomon from Jerusalem. In terms of tariffs, as far as Juncker is concerned, it's okay when his club impose protectionist measures, but it's unacceptable when somebody else like Trump does it. Solomon, you are absolutely right. And I do hope that in tomorrow's newspaper coverage of all of this, the papers in this country that do not like Trump, and that actually, to be honest with you, is most of them, do point out the slight hypocrisy we're getting from Juncker. Let's go to Philip, who's a new caller from Croydon. Good evening, Philip.
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
So was he within his rights to do what he did, Trump?
Sorry?
Was Trump within his rights to do what he did?
Basically, well, he is the leader of a country, so he can do what he wants. But economically, I don't think it's a very good thing to do.
Okay. And
well, because we know from history, during the 1929 depression.
Yep.
Things went bad, and the American government tried to protect the American industry, and we know what happened. the rest of Europe actually retaliated and ended up very badly. And basically, that is what actually brought on Hitler. You know, I'm not saying the same thing is going to happen, but there's every possibility that it might be of the tangent. You know, I think basically it's the American government that has hobbled the American industry that has created the uncompetitiveness of the American industry. So it's got nothing to do with Europe or China or anything. All that you have to do is to bring down the taxes in America for the American industries to be very competitive.
Don't you think, Philip, I mean, and you are quite right to say that, you know, after the Wall Street crash, the world became... The world did become very protectionist, and that did not help things at all. In Germany's case, of course, don't forget they'd had the hyperinflation of 1923 and their currency being wiped out. But that's right. But you're right, it was a contributory factor to the rise of Hitler. But Philip, the difference this time is that America are not putting swinging tariffs on everything. They're putting tariffs on two industries that he believes are key strategic industries. And I think, Philip, that's a difference from the 1930s.
Well, I mean, how do you measure an industry to be strategic?
Well, the truth of it is, the real truth of it is, it's a completely subjective and therefore, to some degree, political choice, isn't it?
Well, it can be a political choice, but economically, I think there is no need to protect any industry. If you are, I mean, Americans are in the forefront of technology.
Yeah.
I mean...
OK, so on balance, you'd rather he hadn't done it, Philip?
Yeah, basically.
OK, fine. No, you've made your point. Thank you very much indeed. Why are our leaders and politicians so close-minded, Nigel? They always revert to tariff tit-for-tat, even when we have WTO rules. Why is that any good for our economies? I would free up all trade and take out all tariffs from all countries. Well, provided trade is seen to be not just free but fair, then that might work. Ideally, the UK should stand with the EU against the absurd foreign policies of the US. Well, at the moment, in many ways, of course, we are, with whatever Boris Johnson says on foreign policy, on Iran, or whatever Liam Fox is able to say about us appealing to the World Trade Organization over tariffs today. We are still completely locked inside the European Union and not making our own decisions. Martin is a new caller from Abingdon in Oxfordshire. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening, Nigel. I voted leave.
Yes.
For my own reasons. I hear lots of politicians saying why everybody wanted to leave and things like that, and they talk a load of rubbish half the time.
Right.
Basically, I left it for my own personal reasons. And just on Mr. Trump, I'm not a big fan of Mr. Trump. He can do what he likes with America, as long as he don't bring it to our shores. Because at the end of the day, I don't want America running our country, because they own so much of our stuff already.
Well, Martin, but we're also the biggest foreign investor in America, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. But what I'm saying is, we've got enough problems with our own industries in this country, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying the 300 million pounds of steel that is going to affect mean jobs at the end of the day, our jobs.
Martin, I have made it clear twice already. I'm very sorry for people who are working in the diminished steel industry, because if we'd not been part of the European Union, if we got our fingers out and left, I think they would be in a much better position tonight.
It could have been in a better position if our governments stood up for our industries.
But our government, Martin, as EU members, couldn't do that. Outside of it, we can.
We sell everything off, Nigel.
I know. No, I don't. Look, water, gas, electricity, you name it, we do. And Martin, I think there are lots of people like you out there who feel government should do more standing up for us. Martin, I thank you very much indeed for your call. John in Sevenoaks says, Farage, I hope Brexit is a disaster and people really suffer big time. I can't wait to listen to your show, then it will all have been worth the suffering. Really, John, I think it's just about the lowest calibre SMS I've had for a very, very long time. I tell you what, matey, you and Grayling could go out for dinner, couldn't you? He wants to sell the country out as well. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:45. Nobody yet has said in this debate that perhaps what Trump is doing is putting these tariffs in place because he wants to renegotiate NAFTA and he wants to completely renegotiate the relationship with the European Union rather than leaving these things there for the rest of his administration. And he may well win another one in 2020, for all I know. So you never know with Trump, do you? Very often it's all part of a much bigger game. But he did make promises to those steel workers, and by doing this, he will believe, and they will believe, that he is actually keeping them. And I get a tweet very much in line with that. I get it. An elected leader has made promises and is actually keeping them. Yep, he is good at that. A different theory I get here on Twitter. Trump knows trade wars are bad for the US and its trading partners. But today's announcement is all about distracting from the Trump-Russia investigation, which is closing in around him. Well, I've not seen a single piece of evidence that suggests that that is the case. Nigel Farage and LBC desperately trying to find a way of defending Trump's trade tariffs on UK goods and British jobs. Reality is, even as the biggest foreign investor in the US, we are still being hammered by Trump on trade. We are at his mercy. No, we're not. We're at the mercy of Brussels. They decide our trade policy, not us. And we would not be part of this. We would have negotiated an exemption. And particularly because the steel products that we sell to the US, we're not selling raw steel to the US. We're selling highly engineered products, specialist products, made very often by small manufacturers in this country. They've been fabricated from steel that has been made, and they're used in specialist construction sites and all the rest of it. And I've visited, in my time as a politician, some of those factories and some of those people who will be suffering today, and I feel sorry for them. But overall, please, folks, don't get overexcited when the BBC News tells you that, something catastrophic is about to befall the world economy compared to the overall size of trade and the relative economies of the countries. This is relatively small and strategically placed on just these two industries. Robin is another new caller from Colindale. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. Just a quick thought. President Trump was elected by the people of America on his manifesto. He's sticking to his manifesto. That's his responsibility, to look after the welfare of the American people. I wish that our present government actually had the same attitude, which they don't seem to have. He's a negotiator. He's a businessman. He's not a politician. So I'm just thinking, when we get to that stage that we get Brexit, who in the present cabinet has actually any business negotiating skills? None. How many of them have actually had a proper job? Just about none.
Well, no, some have, actually. Some have. But
I mean, a real job, not writing and things. I mean, a real job.
Well, I think David Davis did work at Tate and Lyle for some years before getting into politics.
Did he actually roll up his sleeves and work, or was he in the management side of things, telling people what to do?
Robin, I don't know the answer to that, but I really don't. I'm just trying to... look, I've often said in the past, none of them have ever had a proper job, and generally, Robin, it's a pretty safe bet to say very few of them have.
Yeah, it's about negotiating skills, because the first thing I would have done after Brexit, had it been Theresa May, was to see whether, one, we could actually feed ourselves and not rely on foreign food imports should the Brexit deal not go according to plan. No one ever thought about that. No one's ever thought about how we're going to actually negotiate with Donald Trump. You sit down across a table, you have a pint of beer or whatever, and you negotiate with him. That's what he is. You can't change what he is. He's going to be there for another 2 years and possibly another 4 years. That's what you have to do.
When I saw at Davos the British Prime Minister sitting in a chair next to Donald Trump, there was Trump sitting forward on the edge of his chair, sort of trousers up, chin out, looking bullish for all the world, and Theresa May was sort of shrunk back into her chair like a little bird that's landed on a ledge and is feeling a bit cold. And I thought, goodness me, I think she actually feels inferior in his company, and that I think is a real problem.
Well, I mean, you've got to question. The one thing is that how does someone who is elected prime minister suddenly call a general election when she has a majority in the House of the Parliament, and then causes all the grief of now having to do with the Northern Irish DUP, deals there. I mean, you've got to think what sort of brain is functioning there.
Well, it's a question. It's a question, Robin.
Functioning there.
People will ask that question for years to come. What on earth possessed her? Robin, thank you for your call. Rick says on Facebook, I think outside the EU, Trump would drop tariffs on the UK. So do I, Rick. And one of the reasons he would do it is to show the European Union that this American administration doesn't like dealing with globalist blocs. It likes dealing with nation states. It's something every man and woman in this administration in DC believe in with their heart and soul. David on Facebook says, Trump said all this time he was elected, he said tariffs put on the US were unfair. Europe changed nothing when they thought they could walk all over him. Well, they were wrong. First-class president puts his own country first. And David, he did all the way through. All the way through this, he said he wants a fairer deal from the European Union, and they've not been prepared to give an inch. Trump has the mandate to do what he has done from the USA election. Juncker has no mandate to retaliate. No, but Juncker has real power. Because the real power of the European Commission is they haven't been elected and they can't be sacked. Although, in the case of Juncker, his term is coming to an end at the end of November 2019, and he will go into retirement. I'm going to go to Joe, who's calling from Brighton. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. It's the first time we're going to fall out on this one.
Well, that's all right. I'm going to sit back, Joe. I mean, tell me that Trump was not within his rights to do what he did.
Oh, he's in his right. I'm petrified for what's going to happen because, look, I'm going to tell you this now. We have a lot of American companies eyeing up our assets. And if I see that our negotiators are like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, we need Mike Tyson negotiators, and we don't want the big five because they have dodgy billing. Just ask Eminem and Dr. Dre about the billing from the big five consultancies. But let me say this, Humana and all these companies are waiting to take parts of the NHS, buy out Virgin and all these different types of companies. They are looking for a field day. They've seen how weak our negotiators are. That's the problem.
Well, no, Joe, I do understand that. And I suppose you could say, well, we've allowed the French and Germans to buy all of our energy-producing companies.
Exactly.
Joe, there is a problem with the way we negotiate things. You know, I've watched at first hand the Foreign Office, Tony Blair and others negotiating in Brussels and losing virtually every single time. For entering into trade negotiations, we need the right people. And frankly, Joe, what I would have done, already, and there's still time, why don't we poach people? Let's poach people from Switzerland. Let's poach people from Chile and South Korea, the real experts at trade. So you're worried, Joe, that we enter into a trade deal and America effectively just walks all over us?
I believe so. Let me tell you why. You're got extrovert personality like me. Where I've done presentations with American telephone companies doing business development, they said, I have never seen anyone in Britain discuss a business development project like you. And the person said they worked for Coca-Cola. We have a little bit of reserve about us in the way we do things. We need to be like animal, like Trump is. He's an animal when he's out there.
He is, isn't he?
You've got to have that lynx effect when you do a business negotiation.
Well, maybe what we need, Joe, maybe we need some different kind of people in politics. People who aren't afraid of breaking a few eggs to make an omelette. Joe, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Well, anything to do with Trump is contentious. Some of you don't like tariffs on principle. Some of you think maybe actually we should do a little bit more to protect some of our own industries. The one point I would make about all of this is he promised the American electorate he would do it, and he's doing it. And that, to me, restores faith in democracy. It's the same argument that's going on in Italy, with all these German politicians and commissioners telling them this is what you will do, and the Italians won't. Nigel, Trump is the man for this country. May is a woman for the EU, says Tom in Basingstoke. I respected Trump until he gave Kardashian a platform, says Anne from Missley Heath. Very good, Anne. Well, I am going to be off for a week. Yes, I really am. Within the United Kingdom, within the British Isles anyway, and I'm hoping the weather's going to be okay. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'll be back on the 10th of June. Alistair Campbell will be standing in for me this Sunday. That'll be different, won't it? From 10 o'clock. And from Monday to Thursday next week, it's going to be Clive Bull, who it'll be Collins at 10 o'clock.